There she is.
Sorry, for whatever reason, Clubhouse didn't want me to find this. I'm feeling like the world is out to get me.
That kind of moment.
That kind of thing. So, hey, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you? How is everybody today?
I hope everyone is good. We're into November. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, which we are, it's starting to get cold.
It is, right? It is.
And I'm cold.
All right, folks, can you do us a favor? Go ahead, hit that plus symbol down below. And we're going to be talking about a pretty awesome topic today. And what we're going to be talking about is actually work product and your work product specifically. So what we're going to do is if you joined us before, what we do is we chat for a little bit, and then we invite you guys up, and then open up for Q&A. So for those of you who are watching us on the replay on our YouTube channel, because we record this just the two of us, you guys are welcome to hop over to Clubhouse anytime and connect with us over there as well. You know, definitely hit the like and follow and all that other really good stuff so that really great people like yourselves can find us. So, all right. Okay, so we're talking about work product.
We are, and talking about specifically from an HR viewpoint, because it turns out, this is going to be shocking to some of you, but HR people are really nice and we're really prone to help each other, right? We really like to help, but sometimes that becomes a problem when it comes to work products. And this is something that we see all of the time, is one HR person will say, hey, do you have a policy for this? And some other HR person in another company will say, oh, yes. It isn't that nice. It is nice. But there's some problems, right, Brenda?
Oh my, yeah. And then ultimately what happens is that they share it and then it gets implemented and it gets used. Now, in all fairness, this also happens with businesses that don't have an HR person in it as well. So if you are walking into that scenario where all of a sudden and I see this in government contracting all the time, especially with small businesses, where somebody says, oh yeah, well, you know, I got this policy from my best friend and his company, and this is what they do. And they're in, 12 states where you're only in one. And, listen, if you have ever written policy and you have multi-state employees, you know that every state has a different flavor and a little bit different seasoning, right, as it comes to policy. So you have to be, first off, if you're coming into that situation, you have to be very vigilant and understand where these policies are coming from.
Right. And you can't just take a policy from another organization and just implement it in yours. It may be perfect, but you don't know that necessarily. And especially if we're talking about different states, and the most ridiculous little rules exists in various states. Mm-hmm. Things that you wouldn't think of. For instance, drug testing. In Nevada, you cannot hold marijuana use against someone. In Colorado, which also has legal marijuana, you can. So you, being a nice person in Nevada, call up your buddy in Colorado and say, hey, can I borrow your policy? And you're like, that's perfect, because we're both in states with legal marijuana. You implement the Colorado policy, and then suddenly you find you're behind in big trouble because you didn't realize that there's this big difference in the rules. And, and Nevada also has special provisions for what disciplinary actions you can take on someone who gets a bad review from a secret shopper. Did you know that? I just learned that. Like,
That's interesting.
yeah. So, in most states, you have a secret shopper come in, writes up a report that says your employee was super rude. You can go ahead and just fire that employee. Not in Nevada. You can't do that. You have to do a full investigation. You have to show them the footage. Like, it's a big deal. But do most people know about that? Probably not. And if you're in that point where you're asking people for their policies, you probably don't know what's going on.
Right. And last thing you want to do is you want to put yourself in a position where not only you're setting your company and yourself up for problems, but you're also tromping on an employee's legal rights. So we don't want to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there's also too, and we know this to exist in the last 2 years, is that and not that we want to get into the vaccine conversation because that's not where we're going, but COVID has really shuffled that deck where there's this big battle between states and the federal right now. And we see it all over the place. There's what is it? What did I say yesterday? There's like 14 states right now that are suing the federal government for the vaccine.
Yeah, and Florida is doing legislation to withdraw from OSHA.
Yeah. So
I mean, like, it's
yeah. So there you go. There's your HR hangover for the week. So your HR hangover for the week. But that's the thing is that you might get a policy. I'm going to use government contracting again as an example, and we may have one or two government contractors online, and we may not. That's fine. But what is important about understanding government contracting is that the Fed and the state don't always get along, and the same bodies of government that tell you that you have to abide by a law are the same bodies of government that are putting you in position to violate it, and that's what's happening now, widespread across the board. So let's go back to the drug policy thing again. So here's New York City. New York City, not the state, the city, prohibits employers from testing for THC in pre-employment testing. As an example, the rest of the state, I don't believe does. And of course, the Fed still has marijuana listed on Schedule 1, right? So as a government contractor, in order to maintain compliance and to meet the requirements of being able to serve and support the federal government, they have to abide by the provisions of the Drug-Free Workplace Act of 1988. Well, New York City says, no, now when it comes to pot, you don't. Right? What do you do? So, and the rest of our country is like this now with COVID. And clearly, there's a lot of disagreement about what's going on with OSHA's emergency temporary standards. The federal's trying to push it, even though there's a stay. They're saying, go ahead and do it anyway. The courts are like, dude, so it's like there's family squabbling right now in our governments. So it's getting interesting. And that's why attention to work product now more so than ever is critical.
And yeah, I mean, just those few examples, this is how you get yourself in trouble when you try to get somebody at another company's policy. And even if you're in the same state, different industries have different rules and different things that they're subject to as well. If you're a government contractor versus not a government contractor, when I worked in pharmaceuticals, the FDA could show up any day unannounced and demand a complete organizational chart of the company. Yep. Nobody walked into the Burger King that I worked at and asked the same thing. It's just
nobody comes fast roping down onto the roof of your fast food organizations to see if your labor is in check.
What your organizational structure is. But in pharma, that they do that, and there's good reasons for that, because there's all sorts of laws regarding who's responsible and blah blah blah. But if you don't know that and you're borrowing somebody else's work product, it can really get sticky.
Yeah.
And there's another sticky side to it too. That is, so I work for a company, and they say to me, Suzanne, please write up a policy on, I don't know, what's my policy? Drug testing, because we've already talked about that. And I write up my policy and it's great. It's the best policy ever. And Brenda says, dang it, I got to write this policy on drug testing. Can I see yours? And I say, sure, here you go. Now, there is a problem there that what I did was a work product for the company. I don't own the copyright on that. I can't give it away. Now I can go to my boss and maybe my boss says, sure, we like Brenda, give it to her, but maybe not. And there's a lot of proprietary things I see even in my own Facebook group, which I love, people being like, oh, I have a PowerPoint presentation for that. Super. But is your company okay with you giving away that PowerPoint? Because we paid you for it. It belongs to us. And now you're giving it to people. Some companies don't care. Some companies are happy about it, but some are not. And the thing is if you're not 100% sure, then this is not something that you should do. It can get you in trouble. In big trouble.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people, honestly, and I see this in a couple of groups. There's a lot of people that would be that choose to swap policies and resources like that really fast, rather than, and this is the best solution to all of this, is get a membership to SHRM. Get a membership to SHRM and model from their templates. That's the whole reason why they put policy templates out there. They're reviewed and they're legally sound, right? It's a good foundation. I mean, SHRM is our industry's, all thing be it all, right? Even though it doesn't hit everything, that's fine. But they have a team of attorneys that actually put policy out for you to model from and to use on purpose, so that you have something and you're not, spending thousands upon thousands of dollars running to your, employment attorney, say, hey, listen, can you put together a uniform policy? Right? So they have a lot of that stuff already out there that is designed for you to take and adopt. But again, it comes from, it's not legally perfect. It's what's deemed as legally sound, which means that it has the foundation to stand on its own 2 feet. You now therefore go in and remodify it so that way it works to your advantage. You have to be careful about the language when you do, because verbs and adjectives can change the nature of your policy. So you have to understand how that works. And that's where, once you get your policy together, you therefore, the best investment at that point is to send it to an employment attorney for a legal review. They will make recommendations and put their stamp on it.
And it is always, always, always cheaper to have your employment attorney review it than it is to have your employment attorney defend something that he or she did not write. And, as Brenda mentioned, verbs and adverbs, they can mean something different. There was a Supreme Court case a couple of years ago where it all came down to an Oxford comma. And there was no Oxford comma. So the question is was it a comma? Should it have been 2 separate things or together? And just so you know, the Oxford comma is the legal standard now. And it was an employment law case. It was in the trucking industry, but it all came down to that. And so when you're borrowing somebody else's thing, and with the COVID is a good example. Both Brenda and I have been doing webinars for the past 18 months on COVID, 2 years. I don't even want to think about it. And I have another one tomorrow on the emergency temporary standard. So if you're interested in that, hit me up. And even from, at one point I was doing at least one a week on these, and next week's was not the same as this week's because so much changed in the meantime. So you pull out somebody's perfect policy from 2017, it's just not gonna fly. Your old policies need to be updated, and borrowing policies could get you in trouble on both sides because the person that you're borrowing it from may not have permission to give it to you. And it's not tailored to your company. It may not be tailored to your state laws. Or if you're in one of those states like New York or California, where cities have lots of different things, it may not be tailored to you. And this pains me as someone who loves to help other people. And I just, I'm always like, oh, I know here. But a lot of HR people are like that. They really, truly are just genuinely kind people who want to help. But it's kind of a scary thing.
Yeah. And what's so there's something else to know about modifying and adjusting policy. So if you get a policy from somebody else that has been legally reviewed by an attorney and it's wrong and you put it in place, it is going to be really difficult for another employment attorney to justify how they can defend somebody else's work when so let's say, for example, like you inserted a segment of a policy from somebody else into a reviewed piece of legal work that your attorney has already blessed, and you did it independently. Look, there's a little code down at the end of those documents that employment attorneys review stuff. I don't know if you know that or not, but there is. And if you make an adjustment and say, well, this is the policy that we've had all along, this is what we got from you, they'll go back into their database, pull up that code, and then they'll do a comparison and they'll go, no, that is it. Somebody stuck something in and it's wrong, and I'm not defending that. I've actually seen that happen. I've actually seen an employment attorney come back and say, I can't defend this. This isn't my work product. It is now null and void. And so, and I hold that same position too. Like if I'm contracted to do, any type of policy work or handbook development or something like that with a client, and I've been going through this recently, and thankfully they're really good to work with. One of their admins went ahead and made adjustments to the drafts that we were working on. I didn't catch it until she told me that she made changes to it. I did a comparison. I called the owner and I said, your team has now made adjustments to my work product, which means that my work product now is null and void. And she went, excuse me? What happened? And she was even caught. She didn't even know, right? So yeah, because I will absolutely take that position because that's my butt.
Right. Right. And like it can be just as little as the Oxford comma. Just like,
yeah,
some people don't like the Oxford comma. They're wrong, but some people don't like it. And so you just pull it out because you're like, yeah, I don't like it. And you don't realize that there's Supreme Court precedents on this, and that's why it's in there. It's not a matter of aesthetic preference or whatever. It can be a matter of completely changing that documentation. And this doesn't mean, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I remember several years ago, was it like 2015, 14, something like that, where the Department of Labor, so there was a change that was coming out in the federal posters, and the National Labor Relations Board and the Department of Labor were not playing very nice. And literally, I kid you not, the argument that wound up going to the Supreme Court over this was a word and a comma on a federal poster. And so the two sides weren't playing very nice. I remember that vividly. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I do remember that because I had all my clients screaming like, when are we going to be able to get new posters? And I've never heard so many people be so excited about new posters in my life. And I'm like, as soon as we get a ruling on this ridiculous thing. But yeah.
It can be this ridiculous thing. And this is not to say that every policy has to be full of like legal language or whatever. You can have easy to understand policies written in clear language. You
Right.
can do a PowerPoint presentation about your sexual harassment policy without using legal jargon. That's not what we're saying here, but what we're saying is you need to make sure that you're in compliance. And what that compliance is going to vary from state to state for sure, sometimes from city to city, and definitely from year to year. I mean, if somebody wants to go pull up an archived copy of the very first COVID webinar that I did, I would probably cringe at it now, even though everything I said was accurate, 18 months ago. But it's not accurate now. So just because you're like, oh, Suzanne Lucas, she knows what she's talking about. I do. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
So, and
But what I
so
said 18 months ago doesn't apply today.
that's right. That's right. Now, and here's another thing too. So we talked about we talked very briefly about verbs, adverbs, adjectives, right? So language in and of itself. If you look at a policy, you're going to see that it's very active language. It's not passively written at all. It's active language. It talks about what an employee can and can't do, talks about what an employer can and can't do. Very straightforward. When you've got work product that comes in from somebody else or somebody makes a change, like I'll give you an example. A little while ago, I was working through some edits on a handbook with one of my clients, and the employee who made the changes on their direct deposit, it basically, the policy is saying that the employees can go ahead and enroll in direct deposit, and she changed the language to may use direct deposit. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Or no, they are encouraged to use it. And I said, all right, but now what you've done by changing the words may enroll to encouraged is that your policy is now stating that they now no longer have permission to enroll. What you're saying is that you're encouraging them to do it, which is great. You've now changed active language into passive. So basically your handbook is coming back and saying that you can enroll it, but we may not necessarily give you permission to do so. Whereas before we were telling you all out, yes, employees are permitted to enroll in direct deposit. Just something simple as that. And a lot of people write in passive language. So when you get policy from somebody else that has passive language in it, you've really now altered the intention of what your current company should be doing.
And another area in which people make mistakes all of the time is by making an implied contract and getting rid of the at-will status. And people do this it happens all the time when people are like, oh, here's your 90-day probationary period, after which you're a permanent employee. And for those of you that are on Clubhouse and can't see Brenda, her eyes bugged out of her head at the thought of a permanent employee. People use that language all the time. You hear it a lot, in temporary jobs. This is a temp to perm. I hate that because no job is permanent, and we want to keep them as at-will employment. And if you're not careful, you can end up turning your handbook into a contract and you destroy the at-will relationship. You don't mean to do it,
No.
but by borrowing somebody else's work product or by doing it yourself when you don't know what you're doing and not getting a review by an expert, by an attorney, you can get in big trouble. And actually, this is not handbook related, but this morning on LinkedIn, I saw a post by an employment attorney, David Miklas. He's in Florida. And he had a client who the Department of Labor showed up at their office. And instead of calling him, the head of accounting was like, oh, okay, I'll just get you what you need. And turned over all of this information to the Department of Labor. And of course, the Department of Labor is not going to say, Brenda's eyes are now on the back of her head, are not going to say, no, what all we needed was the information on this. And he just turned over this massive amount of information. And so the Department of Labor comes back and they're like, well, hey, what about that? And the accountant's like, oh, sure, here you go. And it wasn't until it became this huge mess that they're like, oh, maybe we should call our employment attorney, in which case poor David Miklas has to come in and sort this out. And what would have been something resolved in a few minutes with the Department of Labor is now turned into a nightmare for this company, because somebody was acting like they thought they should instead of knowing what they should do.
Right. Yeah, or checking. And there is no poor David Miklas in this one, because the man's getting paid.
Yeah. Wealthy David
Sorry.
Miklas.
Yeah.
That's what I should say.
I mean, yeah, there's no poor David. That's like, bank for David Miklas right there. But, the thing that I was thinking about, going back to what you were saying about permanent employee, when you classify, I totally get what people are trying to do when they say that. When they classify employees, like they see temporary, seasonal, right? If your handbook, I have never seen a handbook ever have the definition of a permanent employee in there. You have to be very careful with your language when you do that stuff. So if they're a full-time or part-time employee, you have those definitions. If they are, and it should be regular full-time, regular part-time, and then you can have your definition for seasonal or part-time or whatever. When you use the wrong word, that's a perfect example, is that it absolutely will. Even if the statement in your handbook says that this does not constitute an at-will employment, this does not constitute a contract, but then you've got confliction in there, then where to get clarity will actually come. Like if it's discovered and you're in the middle of a harangue or something like that, honestly, unless you've got a good attorney that's capable of negotiating through that, you're probably going to wind up having to have that resolved out in court, because the judge is going to have to determine what out of your handbook, what is the most consistent form of language in there. So if it's piecemeal from a lot of different things and it doesn't come from that reputable source, that you're just going to have an HR hangover. And like when it's all said and done, that's like my new thing, an HR hangover.
An HR hangover.
I like that. I've had a few of those in my life.
Haven't we all?
Thankfully, I haven't been the source of it, so which is good. But I certainly have had my share.
You've had your share. And that's the thing, is that what we're trying to do here is prevent your good intentions from causing you problems. Right. And all of this stuff starts on good intentions. I'm going to borrow your PowerPoint presentation. That's a good intention. You want to share with me because you're nice. I'm saving my company time and money because I can just modify yours. But it can come back to bite you in the butt, because you didn't have permission to give that to me. It's work product that belongs to your company. And then you're in a different state than I am. And so I'm, giving a sexual harassment training class in Connecticut based on Virginia law. And that's it. General principles are the same when it comes to sexual harassment. Don't do it. But the details can be a real problem. And especially when we have those policies, and especially if you're multi-state. And right now, so many companies are going multi-state because with people wanting to work from home, and they're moving out of the region, they're moving out of that area, that you never planned to be a multi-state company. But then when you let somebody work from home in a different state, you become a multi-state company. Because it's where the employee works, not where the headquarters are, and not where the business is registered, that matters. And there's some tricky things you can do about that with contracts and blah, 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 but you can't do that because you're not an employment attorney. If you're an employment attorney, you can figure out how to do it. But you can't, unless you said you are an employment attorney.
And here's the other thing too. Your work product, so we're saying employment attorney. There's a reason for that. I have seen general counsel screw up employment stuff firsthand. And I remember one of them I actually knew, and I looked at something and I looked up at him and I looked at his document and I looked at him again and he goes, what? And I'm like, dude, no. He's like, what are you talking about? And I demonstrated it to him. And he's like, oh crap, I've been writing it this way for years. I'm like, yeah, you need to stop.
Yeah, and I've seen that happen too. I've seen it actually a lot, not just in the company, but on a person that's like, oh, okay, I don't think this is right. And they go to their brother-in-law, the real estate attorney, and say,
the trust attorney. Yeah.
what is the deal here? And the brother-in-law is like, nope, you don't have a case. And then they come to me and I'm like, holy smokes, that is FMLA retaliation. And the brother-in-law had never heard of that. He'd heard of FMLA, but he didn't know what retaliation was. This happens all of the time.
Yeah.
There's a reason why attorneys specialize, you know. So, and if you watch like attorney shows on television and they're like doing a sexual harassment case one week and a murder trial the next week and mergers and acquisition the next week, that doesn't happen in real life.
No, it does not. Those are all specialties, and it takes a lot to it's literally a lifetime of career because there's so much case law in any practice of the law, but specifically with employment law, it changes hourly. I mean, literally, it changes hourly. There's so much case law that comes through. So
there's so much, and just like I said, if you were to go back and do one of my webinars from March of 2020. You would roll on the floor laughing because you'd be like, where is she coming up with this stuff? And I swear to you, it was accurate when I gave it.
What? Yeah. And it changes. So.
And it changes. And even, you know, the emergency temporary standard went into effect last week. And then there was a stay put on it on Friday. And then they had hearings on Monday and Tuesday. You know, we just.
Is it actually going through? Because I have not heard yet. There's so much confusion around it. I have not heard if it's actually going through.
At the moment, as far as I know, the stay is still in effect.
Yeah, and because the government is also the administration is coming back and saying, no, regardless, you're moving forward with this. And the court is like, hey, listen. So yeah.
Yeah, it's insane. So come to my webinar tomorrow and I will tell you that. Yeah, we have to wait for the final court decision, but anyway, I will still help you all out if you're interested.
Yes. Yeah. So, all right. So, new little thing that Clubhouse has now given us as a tool. I just tested it out. Unfortunately, I can't post two links at the same time. So you will see that up at the top of the room is a link to my website. Next week we'll put Suzanne's. Why don't you and I make a decision right now? We'll executive decision it and we'll alternate back and forth. So, but we do have shared resources and you'll see us both in each other's little spheres. So you can find me at BrendaTheHRLady.com. Watch for my new logo. And Suzanne, you can be reached at
www.evilhrlady.org.
That's right. And we also have Facebook groups as well. And we would love for you guys to be a part of that. You can find me over at Next Gen Women in Facebook group. And Suzanne is Evil HR Lady as well. And they are both closed group, which means that if you want in, you have to answer the questions because we don't allow no non-HR people to come in unless we actually know you.
Yes, so you have to answer the question. You're welcome to join my group as a non-HR person, but you have to answer the question and follow the rules. Because one of the things that we do at Evil HR Lady is explain things to non-HR people. So
that's right, all the time. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and stop our recording on our end.
And we will see you on YouTube next week.
That's right. And once we stop that recording, then we're just going to go ahead and open up the room.